Hallo Freunde und guten Morgen. Emo's not here, so I have to pretend to be German. It goes well with my learning to speak German. Today we are focusing on analyzers and one blocking issue, which happens to be an analyzer, which makes that statement redundant, but that's what we're doing. So, yeah, a lot of talking about things that talk about things. Very meta. Let's begin. All right, the one blocking issue. Finalize logging analyzers. 36064.
So for this one, there's 5 different diagnostics that aim to, so yeah, I kind of summarized the whole thing in the table, and I have sample usages lower down. Basically, like as an example, the first example, as you see, the first two are disabled by default. As the explanation in the message purpose says, like the first one just checks the message template that's provided. If it's not, if the arguments in the template are not Pascal case, it would give that kind of diagnostic out when enabled. And then the second one basically hints to using more performant APIs. So like it discourages usage of log trace, log debug, and all of that. Then, yeah, so you would see in the example, first example, self-explanatory. The second one, using log trace, the resolution, and none of these have fixers, by the way. And so basically, the commented out portion explains what would remove the message diagnostic. And then the third one, you'd see the argument is preferred to be string, not numeric. And the fourth diagnostic, the last three are usage type category. So diagnostic number 3 is the numerics issue. 4 says logging format string should not be dynamically generated. So basically, it's just, it might, so like I have 2 examples to show basically having in the message template, dynamically generated string is just not the purpose of using these to find APIs. These are just pre-compiled actions to use later. Last one is the one that's the only one that's of severity warning. And if someone uses it, so the reason it's warning is because if someone today uses this sample, they would get a runtime exception. And the runtime exception is also showed here. And one more thing I didn't, I did mention the first 2 are disabled, and the second 2 are info, the last one is warning.
Can I ask questions about 3 and 4?
Sure.
Let's start with 3. Why can't I put numbers in my log messages? Like I've seen ASP.NET do that for like, this is the duration of how long a health check took or something.
I'll defer that to Pavel.
It's not about numbers as values. It's numbers as keys, because people are in .NET, people are used to format strings that have curly brace 0, curly brace in the format string, and in structured logging we want customers to name their properties.
Oh,
So that's what it is about.
I got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
that
so
I thought it was the one.
so this
Yeah,
is
so
actually
the
the wrong
example's
resolution.
incorrect.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe I understood it wrong too. Okay.
So it's saying don't name. So 0 should not be
That's
in
the
the
issue. Okay.
in the template, or number should not be the thing inside the curly braces.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe the messaging can be improved.
I guess it does say in the format string,
Right.
but the example here turned a literal one into a literal
Yeah,
string one.
that's
Right. If it would just say foo for one, it'd be a lot clearer. Okay, that one. I think that one makes sense to me now.
Yep.
Does anybody have more questions on 3? Or I was going to move to 4. So for 4, like the first one is that becomes a constant string, doesn't it? Like doesn't the compiler
yeah, it's
const the
not
strings
yeah,
together?
it'll be a thing. Yeah.
So maybe let's talk about why 4? Why can't I dynamically generate the format string? Maybe
Let's
not
start with the top one.
dynamically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because-
So I think the constant in that example is a bad example. Imagine you are appending an actual thing you want to log. You're appending exception dot to string, and they want you to put that into a named argument, so you get all the benefits of structured logging instead of appending it to format string every time. And you can have issues with parsing because we try to parse the format string, and if you happen to have curly brace something in there, it'll still be a problem. It's like why you wouldn't want to use string.format and dynamic format string.
So maybe it's just that this example is weird because for logger message define, it feels like whatever you do here is fine. You've built
Sorry,
it, it's defined, you're finished, it is what it is. And if you built it with, you have a constant string that you're prepending or appending to everything, then that's fine. You could even have that be built off of string interpolation because of a bunch of things that you're gluing together. But good luck with the syntax merging.
I missed the define part. Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think this message applies better to dot log something expressions.
Yeah, this is the exact same. For people who are used to see passing arbitrary stuff into printf. I think Jeremy, you gave the string.format example earlier. Yeah, bad things will happen.
So do we want to keep it or not? Because at least it doesn't change per log.
I don't think we want it on define, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no rule on define.
Yeah, we should keep it on log trace or begin scope.
So what is the rule for log trace? Like you expect it to be a literal? Can it be localized, or is that just not a thing people are expected to do?
Not really. Even ASP.NET itself, as you might know, is not very much localized.
Right. I know ASP.NET is not, but if you have customers that for whatever reason do want to localize these, the very first thing they're going to have to do is disable this warning.
No, I think those customers might be better served by define. Like
Okay.
at that point, if you're advanced enough to be localizing, you might as well use the performance feature.
A quick
So
question.
you assume that there is perfect overlap between those two groups.
I think the log trace and other simple overloads are for kind of like hello world, you get into login scenarios. When you get to localized login, I think you're an advanced section of customers.
Well,
I can buy that
localized
argument.
logging would be extraordinarily difficult because you don't get to indicate which order things came in. Like string format, you have the numbers, and that's why they're numbers. They can float around. These, it's like, well, the first thing is going to be called message, so hopefully your language supports that.
Yep. Fair enough.
About the diagnostic, the force diagnostic, the second example, the person who wrote it down might assume that they're going to have like an empty string, but when they use the returning action, whatever value they provide as the argument integer, let's say they provide 1, it's going to print out 1 or 11 or whatever. So it's kind of like confusing for the very least. Like the second usage example for diagnostic 4 kind of shows where if someone provides string empty, for example, as the argument tablet, they minus that they're going to get string empty, but they won't.
How would you ever catch that? Like, how does that look different than any other name? Because there's a dot in it? That would just be like a mismatch.
Yeah, that would be more like
on the parameter count.
Like the casing of like, hey, you're naming your thing non-standard, you shouldn't have a dot in it.
I mentioned that because I think I heard you guys say we want to keep that for only like APIs like log tracing and stuff, but not define. Like kind of.
Right, but I mean, this is totally fine. First of all, there's no $sign here, so it's not actually turning into the empty string. This is going to log with a tag name of string.empty.
Yeah.
And that's either fine and don't say anything, or it's a bad name because you're not allowed dots, and then that's a naming violation, which is more like diagnostic 1. But it's not dynamically generated. Like it's definitely not the same thing as what the title of diagnostic 4 says. So it's either a different thing or it's not a thing. But it's not diagnostic.
Right, and the
4.
user might expect that to be dynamically generated, but I don't know how we'd infer that. Like, yeah.
I still don't fully get the whole, what this whole number 4 is trying to prevent. Like, can we rephrase what number 4 is trying to help the user do?
We want customers to do structured logging, and when you're appending dynamic values to a format string in your log calls, by definition, those values won't become part of some named output in the end, because they're gonna in format string, they wouldn't have accompanying key, and we want all kind of dynamic values to be key value pairs that you can filter by or consume in structured way.
But we've already decided that diag4 won't apply to logger message not defined since it's effectively static at
but it should still apply to log trace and log star methods on logger type.
So you said that there aren't going to be any fixes for these diagnostics. Some of them, I would say, like diag2. Like, I understand what that message means because I know about logger message dot define. But if someone hasn't seen it before, like, is that enough of a message? Is there going to be like a link or one of these examples in it or something?
And by the way, I don't know what the reason is for absence of fixes. It might be just the lack of resources to implement them, but a lot of these can conceivably have a reasonable code fix. Like the first one, obviously just uppercase the first character. Second one is a great example. Getting a log message defined to work is hard, and I think we're doing the strongly typed logging thing that can also benefit from code fix, kind of creating a strongly typed logger type. But I'll let Miriam comment on.
Sure. Yeah, it's just it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, I thought about it too. The first two would make sense to have fixers, but I kind of, because it wasn't gonna make it for 6.0, I kind of didn't put it in. But we could have, like, if we wanted to review having a fixer and then do it later, that's fine. For the first two, it makes sense to have. Third one.
Does the, I mean, I guess in the general case where it's not already violating diagnostic 4 and gluing things together, you know that you can turn the literal and then turn that into a field, because presumably you want a field and not a local here. Like that this is a shorthand fix. Right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, you want.
I think you're right. I think that's what makes a fixer hard.
Ish, right? We can invent an like a convention where we would create a class for you and add logs there, and people would, like, with time just keep following that convention because Fixer is that easy. But yeah, you're right that in that this should be a field in the other class. But I think, Miriam, are we shipping a strongly typed logging source generator?
Yes, we are.
So,
So
the
the-
Fixer should just do that.
This would be an S analyzer over the SDK. So I'm assuming this might have more. So there might be places where this is available, but the generator might not be in those.
I see. All right, but
Alright, so 1 and 2, I have a fixer seems doable. 3 was the example should talk about the left and not the right. And 3 was
And there's no fixer you can make for 3.
right.
How could we?
I'm just
how
looking
can we
at
make up a,
on and off by default. So these 2 were off.
Mm.
Is there a reason? So for the second diagnostic, is there a reason we want off instead of IDE hint or whatever? Like, there's a thing there's like information actually seems fine. Maybe I guess I don't know what we've done with the rest of the performance ones. Do you remember, Mr. Tobe? Guess not.
Sorry, I was muted. What was the question?
For small performance things, do you remember what the severity we've been using is? Have we been using off and you have to turn on the category, or have we been using the like IDE
We've been
suggestion?
we've been using either info or hidden. One of the two, depending on whether we think it's something we want to show up in the errors window at the bottom or the info window at the bottom, or just something where if you're on the line, but nothing more than info.
But we've been doing so. Hidden is the like the dot 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 under the variable that doesn't show up anywhere else.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So I think we could promote diagnostic 2 to hidden. I'll trust you guys on whether or not number 1 may be a breaking change. Maybe that's why you want it off. But it seems like if you're going to write it, you probably want it on.
if it's hidden, do you have to have a code fixer?
Yeah, hidden doesn't affect whether there's a fix or not. It just affects where you learn about it.
But I mean, if you
It
don't
shows
have a
up
code,
info error and warning. Yeah, even if you don't have a code fixer, it still shows up.
it shows up as dot dot dot. But then what does it do?
It just tells you there's an issue.
And then maybe as a link to help docs, or just tells you like, hey, go look up this error code.
yeah, that DAG 2 is hard because for some projects it would trigger on every. I mean, for all projects it would trigger on every single log message.
Yeah.
And like customers might be fine if we gave them an easy way to fix it, but triggering everywhere and just telling them go read about it might be a little bit annoying.
I was thinking about that too, because almost any project might have like log info, log whatever, and then there might be multiple of it, and then so the error window will kind of just like.
Right. So that's where the hidden level of you're on the line, you're looking at the line, and there's a little fuzzy on the IDE that tells you there's a thing here that you may not know about. and then you look at it and it's like, oh, I should start moving us to logger message.define because parsing strings over and over and over again sucks. So. All right. So.
I don't have a strong opinion on this, but we have, for pretty much all the new rules we've written, I don't think we've shipped any of them as disabled entirely, like off. I think they've pretty much all been either we shipped it. We thought it was important, but we decided to just not have it there at all.
Yeah, you're, at least I'm hearing you in bursts, Steve. But I think I got the gist, which is.
Oh, sorry, I'm walking. Yeah, I'm walking through a dead cell phone area with my dog.
Okay. To your recollection, we've not shipped anything as disabled. It's always been at least hidden, and because if it's disabled, why did we write it?
Yeah, we've shipped a whole bunch of legacy FX cop rules ported to C#, ported to Roslyn analyzers as disabled by default or off by default. But any of the ones we've written in the last year or two, I don't think we've shipped them as off by default. Then again, we also haven't written any new naming rules.
Yep. All right, so diagnostic 4, that log trace should not use a dynamic message. You think that one is info?
Yes. Those as info.
Info seems reasonable there. There's a at runtime you may encounter a complexity that you're not considering. And 5 seems hard. Because technically a logger message could float across assembly boundaries, so you may not be able to see what the defined content was. But I guess if you do have access to it, then you may as well produce the warning.
Yeah, this one is the best effort kind of thing. And most customers, from what I've seen, have literals in their log message define.
Yeah, this seems reasonable. If you have high confidence in your ability to track at least a subset of them, like absolutely warn on that subset, right?
So we were talking about diagnostic 5.
Yes. And as was just discussed, like it might miss a few things, but that's fine. As false negatives in my mind are okay, false positives are not okay.
Yeah.
So as in, we might not be able to detect every.
Right. If the log message was defined across an assembly boundary, for whatever reason, then you won't be able to see what the format string of it was, or the structured message, or whatever you want to call that thing. Which means you wouldn't know the parameter count for it, or would you? Because it's defined on int.
Yeah.
So this is actually a
generic count. Yeah.
This is a definition, not a consumption problem.
Yep. Like you would be able to detect this case for all scenarios except when the format is dynamic and like is generated somewhere else. But what we're comparing is the generic argument counts to formatting argument counts.
Okay. Is there a similar thing that should be done for log trace?
Yeah, and I thought Diag 4 handles both, but I might be missing something.
You mean 5?
Oh, sorry, 5. Yeah, that's our like a workhorse.
Yeah.
Like that's why these analyzers are good.
And then the precompiled ones, that one actually locks in. That's the purpose of the generic, is it locks in the parameter count so people know what to do. So we don't actually have the across assembly boundary. So this is everything except a dynamically generated message. Okay, that's nice. All right. Just copying down the categories because I think no one disagreed with them.
So for diagnostic one, we're recommending hidden.
I think so. Maybe stronger. I don't know how. Like, I don't know if this is a convention or a limitation or a suggestion, but I agree with, or I instinctively agree with the gist of what Steve was saying of why are we writing the analyzer if we don't think we're going to turn it on. So
The Pascal case to be hidden sounds good to me, I guess.
because these are just the default levels. If somebody's totally annoyed by it, they can turn it off, and if somebody loves it, they can promote it to error. So
Right. Updated. Yeah, so the example for the diagnostic screen would be updated. No, would the because Stephen said might want to change the messaging to be clearer for diagnostic screen. I don't know. I mean, you could do that.
yeah, I assume that'll come up in the code review. I was really only thinking or concerned with the logical flow.
Okay, so we don't need to approve that message in this meeting.
Yeah, I mean it should be something that is useful to help the person understand that they have a problem and what their solution should be.
Okay.
So, all right. Any other
Thank you.
feedback?
The category of the last one should be something else, or reliability or.
Okay. Since you're about to get an exception.
Yeah. Kind of error.
Done. Thank you, Booyah. And thank you, logging team.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
No more red? I don't know what the refresh interval is. There we go. We just did that one. All right. Prefer nullable get value or default over manual checking.
I'm inclined to hope that we could do a better job in the JIT. And we wouldn't need this.
I guess the only place I really see this working out is if you have a code path that says if not has value, assume default of t. At which point, like, yes, you could delete your 4 lines of code and replace it with a 1 line of code call to this method.
Yeah. Because if it's just you checked has value before reading value, that's tester doer.
Yeah, like
And-
what is your else case? Like if your else case is something other than using default of T, then like this analyzer can't help you, right?
Maybe I misunderstood what this was. I thought this was basically saying if has value returns true, use get value or default instead of value.
Is it?
I may have misunderstood. Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This is so the analyzer is proposing call has value if it returns true, call get value or default. Yeah, like the JIT should make that work better. Like we shouldn't encourage people to write something unnatural just to work around a JIT flaw.
I don't know, it's possible that JIT already gets this.
Okay. Right. So this is just saying get value or default is because it's just get value or default is just going to return the value field, and value is going to check the boolean. So this avoids an if.
Right. Which in theory should be inlined, and the JIT should be able to see the value hasn't changed, and it can eliminate the if anyway.
Yeah. And the last sentence, if nothing else, it makes the job of the JIT easier. But yeah, that does feel like it would just be super weird because you're like that just reads as non-idiomatic.
Yeah.
If this has value, then get value or default. It's like, no, you want value.
Like in SharpLab at least, which is what .NET 5, there is a redundant code gen, but we could fix that ourselves within the runtime.
All right. Does anyone want to argue why we should do it?
I wonder if we could actually we might want to, as an internal experiment, write this analyzer anyway, run it over our own internal code, and then use that as data for whether this is a significant problem that actually does need to be addressed in the JIT. Like we could say, hey, it saves X number of kilobytes of code gen. I don't expect it's going to be in the kilobyte range, but whatever.
I mean, if anybody wants to do any info gathering, then sure. But yeah, it seems.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a good argument to actually productize this. It would just be to gather data.
All right. We said no to something. That means we did our job. Avoid implicitly allocating params arrays in loops. 33793. Why would we only find calls to system methods?
Maybe because system methods, by and large, don't hold on to the array that's passed in. Don't know. So there is, now that I just said that, there is actually an ownership concern here. We would need to make sure that this analyzer only triggers on methods which throw away the array that's passed in once it's done using it.
Have you ever seen a params thing that keeps the array? Like, it feels more like we would want to, like, don't warn about this one list instead of warn about this one list.
Well, creating that list would be a lot easier if we scoped it to system.
It's fair. It feels like it's
I would
one
hope
of the...
that list for system is empty.
I would hope so too.
Yeah. And that if there are cases that it's not, that it's non-public and not in a loop.
And not variable data. It has to be like exactly repeated calls.
Yeah. Because if you have calls to methods with multiple arity, I guess, like, what are you doing? You have two arrays that you're now juggling outside the loop.
I'm not even talking about arity. I'm looking at like case 2. That
Yes.
would not flag. Yeah, just like parameter changed. Isn't that like most of the time when you're in a loop? Like you're not just repeatedly calling the same method with the same argument every time, most of the time.
Yeah, well, because that does seem weird about this, because the fix that I would expect for case 2 is you build the array of 4, and then you just replace the first item before calling console.writeLine here. So you're not recreating the array every time, but you are updating the value.
And like
Isn't-
I agree that saves an allocation, but that's like ugly too.
I mean, it is somewhat common to call methods like stringbuilder.append within a loop or append format. And this would trigger. Would this trigger on that? No, because you're passing different data every single time.
I guess if it's the same variable that changed with that flag, probably, I don't know.
Right. Well, because
You still have to,
the purpose or the intent is
yeah, that's exactly.
this came from. You can't capture it because it modified in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I think any expression, we're not going to know enough to know if it changed in the loop or not, unless it's a literal. So if all we're doing is floating out literals, then there's no point to this. Okay, there's only epsilon point to this, but it's probably not worth the time it took to write. Because yeah, weren't modified is tricky. Like, you need to see that there were no refs, nothing got captured in a lambda, etc. That feels
It does seem tricky.
tricky.
Like the difference between like 4 and 5 is pretty subtle. Like in 5, you know the constructor parameter to C changes versus not.
Maybe it would make sense to flip this and say, instead of having a disallow list, like we simply special case methods that we know tend to be egregious offenders that people often call inside of a loop. And then we just try to make those scenarios a little bit easier. Because then we don't have to worry about all these different edge cases, because we can have done the analysis of these methods ahead of time and just baked the list into the analyzer.
Is it really the methods that are making it difficult, or like?
Yeah.
All
Also,
the way.
like case 4, you can't safely do.
Like a point of an analyzer and fixer should be that there should be no behavioral change whatsoever, right? Like if there's the possibility for behavior to change, like our analyzer shouldn't suggest a code fix. Unless that behavioral change like would be completely unexpected because it's like against pattern or protocol or something. But
I mean, yeah, like, well, it's not the expected case that calling this constructor is going to have done something like have a static of what's my instance count and it knows a unique instance ID, but like moving the new from inside the loop to outside the loop can definitely change things.
yeah, like this is something the compiler would never do because they're very risk averse. And if the compiler would never do it, like, are we kind of treading into dangerous territory?
Right. Because if the thing that we want to say is, hey, you're calling console.writeLine in a loop. It turns out this is actually a bad example because we have up through 4 arguments already as a special case version of console.writeLine. So this isn't actually params. But the if the thing that we want to say we're avoiding is just creating an array of 4 over and over and over again, then that makes a little bit of sense to me that we create an array outside and rewrite the code to just update the members in that array. So you're just saying, here's an array of 4 things, read it, and then like come back to me. This is the reason that I am really excited that one day we may get param span of this just goes away.
Yeah, yeah, and if we enlighten enough of our APIs, like no one ever runs into this anyway. Because a compiler will just do the right thing at that point, like you said. The compiler will hoist the stack allocation outside the loop, and then just keep reusing it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that'll just be automatic.
So, I think my feeling on this is no, we should just get param span. That there's nothing good we can do in the meantime, because none of these are useful.
I'm hesitant to say no.
If,
Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I'd be more on board if case 2 is covered, right? Because like Jeremy said, like there's a way to do case 2, but like it's kind of complicated compared, like, you know, it's more lines of code than the simple thing, right? Like where you just like mutate the array and call it.
Right, and that is definitely the more performant thing. Again, I'm amused that they picked 4, which is the last special case count to console.writeLine. But so 5 would
Sure.
actually be relevant. But and if you're looking at, you know, every allocation matters level of performance because, you know, Gen 0 is almost but not entirely free, then yeah, you would probably be willing to have the unnatural looking, you created the array and what you're doing here is saying, you know, temp sub 0 equal I, console.writeLine this string, comma temp. And like, sure, but...
And if we're limiting the system APIs, like I don't think we have to worry too much about like, oh, someone's comparing references or someone's like holding on to the params array after the call or something like that. But
yeah,
you know, the code is weird.
But the proposal as written seems to explicitly be avoiding doing we're going to snapshot what we can, or even just hoist the allocation outside.
I think the proposal itself was originally written in broad scope, and then someone came along and filled in and proposed these cases. I wouldn't put too much stock in the cases.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And I'm still coming back to like the most egregious offenders that I've seen in practice when reviewing both library and real world application code. And it tends to be stuff like string.split, which I think there's actually already a separate analyzer proposed for. Yeah. Actually, the one you're hovering over, I think, is actually wrong usage, not low performant usage. But yeah.
But yeah, so it's the, you know, things like console.writeLine, we have the 4 argument specialty thing just, you know, to avoid the paramsiness. And how many people are doing 5 and like there's a reason we stopped at 4. We didn't feel 5 was as useful as it was worth its cost in IL, right? Like, so to me, this just really says we want param span, and then that solves the problem, and it doesn't require that you have the somewhat ugly code of you've saved the array outside the loop. I mean, maybe the thing of simply not doing a fixer at all and just highlighting, hey, you're inside a loop structure and you're calling a thing with params. This is more expensive than you think. Like, squiggling it seems reasonable. but the fix is ugly, and depending on what you're doing, like if it's, I didn't look at string builder append format, but it may be one fix may be switch to the new interpolated versions. One fix may be, oh, if I do this as 2 calls to append, then it doesn't allocate the array. I'll just do that. Like there are things that can make your code look clean that still accomplish your task without creating the manually updated array. Which again, like I've done the manually updated array. It solves a functional problem. It's just the code looks messier. And if you are okay with side effect code, you can pass as the expression right here. Oh no, you can't because you need to pass the array there. Never mind. In JavaScript, you could do something terrible. Open paren temp sub 0 equal I close square bracket comma temp close paren. Yes.
The other thing that I wonder about this is like, how good of a heuristic is that it's in this method body in a loop, right? Because like you could still have like, you know, if you extracted the method body to or the loop body to a method, the same issue, but it wouldn't be flagged. Like,
sure.
It's like, do you just highlight like every single time params is used and like let the developer decide if it's hot enough to do anything? I don't know.
Yeah, as a place to put a squiggle, I can see value in, I can see that you're in a loop structure, and I can see that you're calling a params method. Maybe you're not happy with this.
Yeah, I can see not wanting to highlight too much, so maybe that's reasonable.
So it wouldn't be every call to a params method. And again, this wouldn't trip at all because this is not params. This is a call to console.writeLine string comma arg 0 through 3 or 1 through 4,
We got
whatever
you.
we called it. Which goes back to most of our cases where we do have params things and we think of this, oh, console.writeLine is a params method. Most of those still won't get squiggled. So I'm at highlight params calls in a loop, no fixer.
Sounds reasonable.
Is it still only for system?
I don't have strong feelings.
I think it'd be fine for everything. I mean, if we're not offering to fix it, we're not going to harm people's code. We're basically saying, hey, you're calling something that takes params in a loop. There's a really good chance you don't need to do this, but it's up to you how you want to react. And we're not putting it in their face. It's just a grayed out ... when they hover over the line.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
We could always scope it back further if we actually found it caused problems too.
So then that's the ... means it's hidden then.
Yeah.
Hello, I just joined from Tactics.
Hello.
Hello, Emo.
Did you solve all of our problems?
Well, part of the problems.
Excellent. Then it was successful tactics.
I helped fill out some TPS reports.
Great.
You have 8 bosses right now?
Yeah, I mean, they're all happy, I think. Happier.
Just to clarify, this is being recorded and streamed, so we have no problems.
Of course.
Correct. Look at Jeremy using 2 spaces after a period.
I can't not.
I'm right there with you, Jeremy.
Ilan beat that out of me when I reported up to him.
Fight the good fight, Levi.
Yep.
All right. Performance hidden, no fixer.
Yep.
Solve that one. Still no YouTube chat. No one loves us today.
No, everyone agrees with you. That's how you should interpret that.
Or things don't work. Alright, prefer remove out instead of a double dip. Sounds great. Modulo all the missing greater thans.
So the first example, the before and after, actually have different behavior. Because if foo throws an exception, the data will not get removed, or the key will not get removed from the dictionary. So that fixer, I think, would be inappropriate.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Maybe I'm picking nuts. Am I picking nuts here?
Well, so the analyzer is definitely good.
Yeah, but the fixer is an observable behavioral change.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide when's the fixer actually safe.
When there's no possibility of an exception being thrown between getting the data, storing it into a local, and removing it. And I don't care about things like thread abort because they don't exist.
Do we already have an analyzer that contains key followed directly by remove? Because that seems like the only safe case.
So what was that closely related to 33797?
That one is under implementation. Not yet finished though.
Yes. 33797, the one that's linked, is in fact what you just asked about, Steve.
Yeah, so that one should be safe to have a fixer for. I don't think the other one is. Because by definition, if there's anything between the contains key and remove, it could throw.
Yeah.
And similarly, like, because the title as written is indexer followed by remove. And again, it's the as long as you did nothing else.
Mm-hmm. And that's also what 33797 is. It's contains key followed immediately by remove with absolutely nothing in between. Like it actually is. It calls out as an example, like, hey, here's a line of code in between them. The analyzer does not flag it, or the analyzer does not trigger, rather.
Does this show up meaningfully enough to have an analyzer for it? Or maybe that's what you were just saying, Levi. Maybe it's just the other rule, and instead of looking for remove immediately after contains, it's remove somewhere in a block guarded by contains, and then if there's anything between the contains and the remove, it doesn't offer a fixer.
But it's not just contains. Like, this could be, fold these two together with, I think, an existing thing of data try get value.
Try get value.
So you've called try get value and then remove. It turns out that's remove.
Yeah. Because remove will work regardless of whether the values or the key's there or not, right? It just returns a different answer.
Yeah. It is.
Although for that example, if we had, like, these rules can compose, right? If we had a rule that was indexer after a contains key, rule offers to fix that for you, and then once it does, you get another rule that fires saying, hey, you've got to remove immediately after try get value. That can be removed with an out or something.
Yep.
True.
Well, if you have try get value followed by remove, it's just replace try get value with remove.
That's what I mean. But it ends up being offered as a sequence of analyzers and fixes, right? You start with what's on the screen. It offers to change it to try get value followed by remove, and then you get another fixer immediately that says actually you could go from try get value to just remove if you wanted to.
Yeah,
Or we could choose to combine them, but
Sure.
we wouldn't have to.
no, I think you're correct. I'm having trouble imagining an intermediate state where we would just freeze and not be able to make progress.
Yeah. So really, it's because we have a couple things. Like if we're looking at remove, right? It's contains key followed by remove is don't call contains key. I guess if you did contains key remove and then something else, then that's call remove. But if you've just accessed the data followed by calling remove, then you should call remove. But if you do anything else, then I don't think we should even. We definitely shouldn't fix it, and I don't know if we should warn it. Sorry, if we should squiggle it. It's probably reasonable to squiggle it, but not fix it for you. But it
Sounds
probably
like
means
someone
it's
should go off and figure out in a little bit more detail exactly what patterns will flag and what will change them to and come back. Unless you want to design it here.
That's fair. Email
Well,
your
if
names
we-
on it, but I assume you just copied this from elsewhere.
Correct. That was when I filed Steven's master list as individual issues.
If we had an analyzer that is contains key followed and then within that block a call to the indexer itself, which I believe we have that analyzer. If that and absolutely nothing else triggers an IDE squiggle, then we don't need an IDE squiggle for this. Like we just say like some rule has already told you there's a problem here. So that's kind of, I guess, a less aggressive version of what you had proposed originally, Steve, where we don't try to chain fixers one off of each other. We just say there's an analyzer that tells you something. There's a contains key inside of a loop if statement, and then there's an access into the dictionary itself anywhere within that loop. Like at that point, we just kind of squiggle the whole block and say like something weird's going on here.
Yeah,
I mean, there are cases where it's legitimate.
Yeah, what's interesting about this last, we should also consider is that's definitely not safe.
What are we looking at here?
If if dictionary contains key, call foo with data of key, do something else, then call bar with data of key. It's not necessarily the same data of key. Unrelated method
Correct.
call could have had access to data.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Wait. Like this is dictionary though, aren't we assuming that like access is synchronized?
No, sorry.
Sure, but
Unrelated
unrelated
method call could have had dictionary as a field, and updated data of key.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
This is once you've done literally anything, you can no longer say what state something's in, unless you see the line right here, the declaration of said dictionary, and now you know that no one else has access to it.
Yeah, and there are certain assumptions we can make too. Like for example, like we can't assume on our lives that say the equality comparer itself won't mutate the dictionary. But as far as an analyzer goes, we don't have to care about really weird esoteric edge cases like that.
Do we have to worry about foo mutating the dictionary? Like if we're worried about unrelated.
Oh,
methods,
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the argument Jeremy was just making.
Okay, sorry.
I mean, unrelated method call too, but yeah, that's a good point, Stefan. It's foo also could have had access to the dictionary and modified it, so it's this and this are adjacent statements. Well, it's adjacent expressions, and then everything after that is you have to assume that the dictionary's tainted.
Yeah. Well, it also comes down to the example that we mentioned earlier where foo could simply not return. And if foo doesn't return, then no value ever gets removed from the dictionary.
Yep.
So calling remove itself was just incorrect to begin with.
Yep. Okay.
Right, like it could even just throw, and like by design, if foo throws, it's not meant to remove or something.
Correct.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now you have an observable behavioral change.
Yeah.
Without having to fall down to like really stupid, equality comparers and doing hijinks within there. I mean, I know I mentioned earlier, like we should try to follow the spirit of what the language team does and not make fixers that would incur behavioral changes. But I think we have a little bit more leeway than they do, honestly, as long as we're not ourselves too egregious about it.
I don't know. I complain to folks in Roslyn enough anytime a fixer comes anywhere close to making a semantic change. I'm not sure I'd see a difference between those and these.
Fair.
Especially like this comes up for me most when I'm, I have a few minutes and I'm trying to roll some additional, like enable some additional rule across .NET runtime, and using an auto fixer to fix the 1,000 occurrences in the code base. If there's any chance that it's going to mess up functionality, I either have to not do it or review every single one.
Mm-hmm. In these cases, are we talking about like realistic edge cases that the analyzer might be triggering, or are we talking like someone wrote something just weird and contorted?
Oh, I mean, if someone, like Jeremy's example of you could see the dictionary was instantiated in the call frame and was never handed out. Like, I don't care if that method call reached out with unsafe code up the stack to grab a reference dictionary.
Yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, of course. Like we don't care about that.
I mean, there's a trade-off, right? Like, I think if you go too far on the, not making any mistakes ever, then you can basically never offer code fixers. So I think I'd rather be in the camp of we offer a code fixer, but we disable bulk. Because I feel like the benefit of fixers very often is telling people like, okay, what should you do instead? And I think even if you slightly change semantics, I mean, if you apply it in the context of your method, you know where the error is because that's the thing you just touched, right? I mean, I don't know, like with ReSharper, I've never done like replace all basically, but
sure, yeah.
Just learning stuff in the context of the code is super valuable and hard to do when nothing has fixers.
And I think we can probably make some safer assumptions. Like we would never expect contains key to fail, for instance, like ever. Right. And our fixers can probably make that same assumption, even though someone could very easily say throw from within their implementation. It would just be completely unrealistic.
Right.
Right, but as you point out, Levi, this example, if foo throws, then in the before, the dictionary did not get modified, and in the after, it did.
Yeah.
And that's
that is a behavioral change that we don't want to incur. Yeah. The linked issue, the one where we have contains key followed by remove, is still marked as open, meaning that analyzer has not been created yet, even though I believe it was approved. I would be curious to see if people report problems with that once it's checked in.
Fair. All right, so what's our feeling here?
I mean, analyzer seems fine. Code fixer seems to be more contentious, right?
But what do we want to what do we want to squiggle? Is it any like Do we
I
want
mean,
to squiggle this method or this body?
I mean, you can definitely squiggle the first two, right?
Yeah, here we have a call to contains key immediately followed by a call to the indexer.
Sure,
Like
but
that, that in and of itself should be an analyzer.
That's already. I think we already have one for contains key followed by indexer is try get value. So this first thing should be try get value.
Oh, sorry, it's the combination of like contains and remove.
And then now if we look here, this is the, well, this looks like a reasonable call, a reasonable place to call remove, except if bar throws, then it's not. And so do we highlight that and say like, don't change this if you think bar might throw an exception? Like that's where it gets weird. Like we could highlight this but not offer a fixer because there's a method invocation expression between them.
You would also have to change that to an if statement, which means that we're now altering the flow graph of the person's method.
That's fair. I think in this case it was assuming that these two data of keys could be collapsed into the one call of remove.
I mean, I think this goes back to like you're flagging code, right? So like I think in this case, I think it's fine to say, do we really want to encourage people to have semantics like that, where you say, oh, if you throw, then the remove doesn't do anything, or do you want to say, don't write code like that, right? Do the, you're doing. I think it's fair to say 90% of people would assume that this thing doesn't throw, right? So like is the intention really that they want the behavior that we would incorrectly flag, or they just get that behavior because they wrote shitty code in the first place?
Well, like I've many a time used the behavior that lazy of T. If you throw from the callback, it goes back to a I've not been initialized state, and that's the thing I needed to do to initialize this couldn't be done at the moment. Try again later. And
well, that's fine, but like, is
so
that,
if this is some sort of work tracker, this is do work on this key I was given that succeeded. Now clear the work. Like that's different. So like that's it. It's an entirely possible flow. It may be less than 10%, but it's totally entirely possible that this code on the screen would be do some work. Great, the work is done. Remove the thing. We don't need to do processing on it anymore. It's a little weird because it's dictionary key instead of a queue, but yeah.
In this case, we're also saving, on the order of, God, maybe 10 nanoseconds in the best case.
Yeah, I guess that's fair, right? Like if what's the benefit of doing this fixer or doing the fix or the suggested? I mean, I think to me the benefit isn't so much the perf, it's more clarity.
This code is clear, even though it computes the hash code 4 times. Like, this code is absolutely clear. The before code, that is.
Yep. So is the after. It's just different code.
Yes, correct.
I guess that's also fair.
But they're not the same state machine.
Well, I was thinking change it to try get value, but yeah.
I mean, so if you paint it from that point of view, right, then you would say, well, if the goal of this whole rule is perf, right, then the semantics of bar is throwing and then you don't do the remove seems weird. At that case, you probably want to say, well, bar should probably return a bool, and then you should have that thing unconditionally under that.
You're assuming you own bar.
Sure. Like, I mean...
Wait, why would throwing is better performance often than returning a boolean? If you expect throwing to be an uncommon case, you will actually get better performance by structuring your code to throw in exceptional conditions than returning false in exceptional conditions.
Fair.
So if you actually care about performance, use exceptions.
You know that this is going on Stack Overflow with some weird control flow now.
I was going to say, if we had quotes of the day in these meetings, that would be our quote of the day.
No, it's like, this is...
No, I get it.
In like C++ pioneered this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not disagreeing with your statement. It's just that if you
Yeah.
take it out of context, it sounds bad.
Oh, no. Use exceptions for control flow, like Web API all the way.
Yes, especially if you trim it a lot. ... Exceptions are better performance than ifs. ...
Yeah. It's time to throw in HTTP status code.
Yeah. So then, so if that's the consensus, then maybe don't have the rule at all.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you literally, where's the simplest case? We don't. Amusingly, there is no simplest case. Ah, this one. This is a straight up. You should call remove with an out.
That's fair. I guess we could if you scope it to just this, arguably the world is just better.
No, but this is exactly what I think Steve mentioned earlier, right? The contains key followed by the indexer would turn into try get value, and then the second analyzer, try get value followed by remove, would turn into just remove.
Right, but we don't
Like
have that yet. So saying that this should be an indexer or a try get value immediately followed by a remove, that seems reasonable to flag and fix.
Yes.
Then the question is, should we go further and say you've already accessed this key in this flow? Do we want to highlight the case where it went, there was a method call in between, and this may be the same in all of your code, but we don't want to offer a fixer here because there's a method involved. I don't know if we want to highlight that, or if we just want to say this is obvious. We will highlight it. We will fix it. Moving on.
So sorry, what very specifically are we checking for then? Like what pattern?
So the fixer would be an indexer expression or a try get value, immediately followed by a call to remove. Or we could say with no method invocation or delegate invocation expressions between the two.
Sure, because the two lines where your mouse cursor is, like int value equals data of key and then data dot remove key, like I don't expect any real world application ever to have those two lines back to back.
Yes.
Why would you index, store the value into a local, and then remove the key?
Right. If you have a custom comparer that counts the number of times you've called it and gives different answers, then I don't care about you.
No,
that would be the only code that would be broken here.
It's not that. It's like the only time I ever expect someone to be cognizant enough to actually store the value into a local before calling remove is for someone who's already kind of an expert in using dictionaries, and those people are already using try get value and remove and other advanced APIs. Like I don't see the user that this. Sorry. I'm imagining a target audience that this analyzer is going for being like people who are kind of using dictionary in ways that are inefficient, and I can't mesh that with people who have the wherewithal to understand that they need to put stuff into temporary variables.
Isn't the remove with the out, didn't we add that much later than the original remove?
We did, yes, and this code sample is very specifically someone who's aware enough to say, I want to do the removal before I call foo because I know that foo might have a side effect.
Right, I'm just saying, like, this code could exist if somebody wrote their code before we had remove out.
Yes, that is correct. And we're thinking that they've ported their code as is all the way through .NET 7 without changing it.
They've pulled it from .NET Framework. And now they're retargeting for .NET Core uniquely.
Sure, and they already didn't call try get value because they're porting from .NET 1.1.
Again, this could be a try get value.
Yeah.
That's why it's indexer expression or a try get value, followed by a call to remove. Should collapse them. Ignore the contains key. That's a red herring here.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yes. I'm having trouble imagining that the number of people who would benefit from an analyzer is worth the cost to us to implement it. But if we want to go for it, then let's go for it. Because now we're saying we're not targeting the average developer, we're targeting people who are porting 20-year-old code.
Or they've just now given up on Net Standard 2.0.
Didn't the old
Okay.
remove API exist, like in full framework 4 whatever?
Remove with an out. Assuming Emo's table is right here, is
We added that. That's
not
very-
.NET Framework.
Awesome.
Back over here.
Yeah, works for me then. Keep in mind, changing indexer and then remove to simply remove is a behavioral change
Also,
because the indexer throws if the key doesn't exist.
Yes.
And try get value does not throw. So these two things cannot go to the exact same fixed code.
That's true.
Programming is hard.
Programming is hard. So do we want to just say if it's a call to try get value?
This is why I actually think Steve was kind of on the right track earlier, where contains key and then indexer is try get value, and then try get value and then remove is more different remove overload. Just start chaining them. And if you have a call to an indexer followed by remove, well, it could throw in so many different places, we just don't touch it. And then contains key followed by remove can also be collapsed. But I think there was a separate issue for that.
All right. So now that we've reduced it to try get value, it will have 0 hits.
Well, it should have hits if we start allowing them to chain, right?
Fair enough. I mean, it's not allowing them to chain. You do the bulk fix on the one, and now you get a bulk fix on the other.
That at least we believe that these fixes are safe, in that they don't change the semantic meaning of the code.
All right. So category performance. So now that we've scoped it to it's guaranteed right, that's info?
Yeah, I think info's good.
It should be part of the other analyzer, right? Not new one.
I mean, it's a different diagnostic. This requires that you're targeting .NET Core 2 or higher instead of .NET Standard. So if it's in the same class or not, that we don't care.
Wouldn't the analyzer, like Goya said, be able to just tell which API surface you're targeting?
Yeah, I think it's implementation detail, whether it's the same class or not in the implementation, but it's a different diagnostic ID because it's talking about different things.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So as far as the user is concerned, it's a different analyzer, but it may be the same code. As long as it's a different diagnostic ID. That's all the user actually gets to see.
Because we don't want to put these two rules, even though they're strongly coupled, into the same specific ID. I mean, it's fine if the answer is no. I'm just curious as to what, you know.
Again, it's when things get weird in multi-targeting scenarios, right? Like,
okay,
the case of remove here is probably not better enough that you would pound if all of the cases that you ran across it if you're net standard 2.0 and a net core specific. Like, you just turn the rule off. But you would still want the other rule to run. So.
Sure.
Since you would want it off at different times, it's a different diagnostic.
Yeah, the being able to turn one of them off independently is a good reason. I wasn't aware of a case where a person might want to do that, but sure, yeah.
Multi-targeting makes everything hard. All right. Reconsider CLS compliant in CA 1014. But I'm not sure why this is an analyzer. It sounds like a compiler feature, but
to CLS
I
compliant,
think it's almost removing the analyzer.
Is that a? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Pei.
I mean, it's about the existing analyzer.
Is CLS compliant still a thing?
Emo, you're up.
Jesus. I think that's a broader discussion. I mean, there was a recent comment that Tanner made about how C# doesn't actually enforce CLS compliance anymore. I didn't quite understand what he meant by that. I mean, so the problem with CLS compliance is we care about the spirit. I don't think we care about the particular mechanics that we currently have because they have not aged very well, right? So the problem that we effectively have now is that the things that are actually causing us trouble with language interop are not actually caught by CLS compliance anymore, right? So because now the challenge that we have is that it's not APIs, it's really type system features that the thing doesn't really track. So this is a ref, struct, for example, versus this is a dim versus this is a, I don't know, certain interface constraints that we now add. And so I think it would be nice to have an analyzer similar to CLS compliance that would tell us, hey, you're exposing an API that is no longer cross-language. Are you sure? And I think the spirit that we want to have is that there is another way of doing it. And the way can be slower or, more involved or whatever, but it should generally be possible to use the platform, right? And so I think that makes sense. I'm not sure that CLS compliance true false is the way to do that, though. That's kind of the problem. So I don't know quite what to do with it, to be frank.
Obsolete.
I mean, we could yank it out, but then I think we would have to have a replacement, right?
Yeah. But I think you made a very strong argument, though, that the replacement would not be CLS compliant. It would be something different. It would have a different shape and different semantics.
Right. I think the trouble effectively is that the way CLS compliance was meant to work is basically you bubble it up, right? And then it's similar to security transparency, where it's a very simple thing to understand, right? And so what's nice with that model is that it converges and that you only have to look at a given API and to know, well, is this API CLS compliant or not? Versus with the analyzer, it would be a bit harder to bubble that up in API reviews, right? Because, well, how do we know that something is not CLS compliant in that sense, right?
Well, you're using the term CLS compliant right now to mean like doesn't work in F# or VB or something.
Yes, I mean to me that's the spirit of CLS compliance, right? I mean, sure. It's not really the attribute; it's the, does this API work across, right?
Yes.
And so I think and across is also not really a well-defined term either, right? Because it's not like, there's superset subset relationship with every language, but there's an overlapping Venn diagram, and we can totally say that we think of CLS compliance as literally the innermost circle, right? The lowest common denominator, but that might not be usual, what we actually want, because there are certain languages like, COBOL.NET, which quite frankly, I don't care whether I can't use certain features, right? I'm not going to dumb down the platform because they stopped evolving, right? But if we look at the actual languages that are still kept up to date, specifically C# and F#, then also there's a different bar between C# and F# versus VB, right? Because VB, we basically say we don't want to evolve, we just want to keep it working, right? And so I think there is this 3 Venn diagram problem that I don't know how to really think about either. Because if we just dumb it down, then that might not be useful.
So
I think, yeah, and so that's, I think, why I think it's a bit more on Kathleen and whoever the new F# PM is, and Mads to, I think, come up with like, okay, here's how we should think about that, and then we can probably find a way to automate that, because I feel like if we don't automate it, we're gonna miss things, right? And maybe that's okay,
yes.
because I mean, you can always say maybe we just have to add, string-based methods later or something, right? Like what we did with span, which is also fine. But like I'd rather have these things bubble up during design, because then we can still influence the design, right? We don't have to try to find, a way to make the square hole fit the round pole or whatever the saying is, right? So yeah, I think that is something we should think about, how we do CLS compliance, but I don't have a good answer for that today.
So
just killing it though seems bad.
Okay, so in summary, it sounds like this issue is a very interesting problem for us to tackle, but this isn't the right forum.
Yes, I think that's fair. I think this needs a design, I think, more than anything. And then, I have I would be biased towards saying, could we fix the CLS compliance mechanics that we have today? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is no, right? So,
yeah,
but it would be good to.
In spirit, we want to address this somehow.
I believe so. I mean, we're doing it already, right? Every time we add like span-based APIs, we're like, well, how do you call this from a language that doesn't support span, right? So we are aware of some of the limitations we have, but I feel like it's very easy to make mistakes because these things are nuanced, right? And
yeah, and I agree with what you said earlier too about like we don't want to find problems with the API design like in Preview 7 or RC or whatever. Let's just we don't want to react that late.
Or like worst case, like 2 years after we shipped, right? I mean, that's the other reality, is that the language ecosystems also move at different cadences, right? VB is definitely trailing behind. F# is moving as fast as C#, but like they don't use the same sort of libraries, right? So if you're building a website with F#, you're not very likely to use ASP.NET, right? So like there certainly is a bias towards, well, certain things may never materialize in the next 2 years, right? So if we don't consider that, we may be too late, right? So that's the other side of it. All right, I think we discussed this to death, so I think it's something we need to put on hold. I'm not sure how you want to capture the journey, because I talked a lot, but I think the one-line summary is we need to reconsider CLS compliance all up, I think. Because the attribute just doesn't help us with type system features, but it only helps us with APIs.
Okay. So, but of the things that they actually wrote here, it sounds like there's a rule called all enabled by default, which is not actually all rules, and their first point is, can we take the CLS compliance rule out of all enabled by default? I don't know who owns that.
I don't know I think all enabled by default is a concept of the analyzers, right? And I'm okay with doing that, because that's kind of like not changing anything. It just, I mean, these are old FX cop analyzers that reported, right? So I'm fine with saying, we can definitely change defaults, right? That doesn't make any sort of drastic changes to the infrastructure. It's a bit odd that, I mean, all enable by default is probably a bad thing anyway, because you really truly want everything on by default. Seems like an odd choice to make. Because there's a lot of analyzers we have.
Yeah, and a lot of the analyzers we have are also only applicable to like certain project types and certain scenarios.
Yeah, I guess I have no idea what that rule actually is or does.
CA 1014 or?
The all enabled by default. Like, I don't know if
Yeah.
that is actually just a specific list of things that existed as of the time that rule was built, and it's just the FX cop things, or if it actually
Yeah.
is a meta thing that is turn on everything and then minus these in items. Then
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think that the summary is we're okay with turning the rule on and off by default. We're not really keen on replacing the CLS compliance, but we probably should.
all right, closed, unset, ready for review, and assign it to you. What are we doing here?
We should I mean, yes, I think that's probably fair. And yeah, I mean, the issue is, I think, the right one, because it says reconsider CLS compliance, right? That's fair. We should do that.
All right, so move it to needs work so that the tool picks up on it and assign
Yeah.
it to.
Yeah, assign it to me, and then I can have the conversation with the other ones. And then we tackle that for 7. Even though we're not going to reinvent CLS compliance for 6.0 at this point. But I think there's more and more innovation we're doing, so I think this one is also warranted. So.
All right. How are we doing on time? All right. Prevent wrong usage of string split 47927.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, the very first line. Oh, sorry. There are overloads of string.split, which will take you see you see that string.split, it takes a char separator, then the int count, then the string split options. There are scenarios in which if you're passing a literal char to as a string.split parameter, that char might actually match the int count parameter rather than the separator parameter. So you might be intending to split on character A and character B, but the behavior that you'll see in practice is you'll end up splitting on character A, and then character B will be converted to an integer and then treated as a count.
What are we
Where the
talking
count
about? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, where the count is the maximum number of elements you'll get back in the array.
Weren't we talking at one point about not doing this just for split, but instead having a general rule that says if you're passing a constant character to something that expects an int 32, you're almost certainly doing something wrong? And
yeah, there's if you scroll down, like there's actually a proposal for that as a more general rule. You're right, not just for string split. There. Yes. So this is what Carlos has suggested.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm wrong because there's an issue here for it, but I thought that you had to use the cast operator to turn char into int.
It's implicitly convertible.
Maybe it's just because when I use char, I'm going into byte, and therefore I need it. But
There is a related issue. Let me see if I can find it real fast. What number was this? 47927?
Yep. Because yeah, if we want to say that we feel that the language decision to say that char is implicitly int is questionable, then and we think it's worth having an analyzer that flags all of those cases, like that seems reasonable to me, because it's certainly surprising.
I don't think it was that general. I think we were talking about just across API boundary. Like you should be able to say int I equals, /t.
Fair enough. So if it's
Yes.
a char going to an int as part of a parameter expression, or
Yeah,
argument
and
expression.
In the related issue 46103, I had also potentially proposed that we special case parameter names to say if it's capacity or count, then we trigger the analyzer. Otherwise, maybe we don't. But triggering on parameter names rather than just API shapes seems a bit weird to me.
At the same time, in the last week, I wrote code that on purpose passed char to an int parameter. So
What?
in that the GUID code you reviewed, Levi.
Oh, yes, yes.
Although that wasn't a constant, that was a variable.
Yeah.
And I guess we'd only do this for consts.
I don't think the proposal had it only for consts, but I mean, we absolutely could if we felt like that was the more common case. I mean, it would certainly fulfill string.splits requirements.
Yeah, I mean, granted, if you had an array called, match chars, and you passed match char sub 0 and match char sub 1, you could have just passed the array. But, yeah, I'm not sure that I would limit it to only literals. Maybe that just means we would do it as two different diagnostics. One is a char expression and the other is a char literal.
What would be the difference between the two?
Steve would turn one of them on and not the other.
Well, I mean,
Well,
why would
Steve-
you not just do an explicit cast? I mean, at that point, it's fine, right? If you do an explicit cast, you would not complain, right?
Yeah, then you're totally fine. The rule would in all cases only ever trigger on implicit widenings.
Seems like as a general, like, this is how it should be done, seems fine, right? We're not limiting what you can do, right?
I do struggle with this because at that point we're basically implementing arguably it's a style rule, and I don't think we should really be in the business of style rules. At the same time, we're trying to flag actual mistakes in people's code, but we're basically writing a rule that says you have to use explicit casts. Implicit casts violate our guidelines.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I would just say, like, this particular conversion is, like, make up some percentage indication of an accident, right? So that's why it's good to have an explicit cast for that. I mean, arguably, I would say C# messed up in V1, but like that's maybe a different thing. But like most implicit casts are fine, right? Like that's
like
just
implicit
one example where we know that people make mistakes all the time.
Implicit byte to int, implicit int to long, those make sense. But I feel like, I guess I don't know what we take in split. I assume it's char array and not IEnumerable of char.
It's param char array. But
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you had a string that was, split string, and you passed split string sub 0, split string sub 1 because, I don't know, you're weird. Like, saying that you're passing an indexer expression on a string into a thing that takes int, that feels like you're probably not calling what you think you are calling. Which is why for me, it's that maybe we're being a bit opinionated, but I feel that the implicit conversion from char to anything is wrong.
What we might be able to do, so that this problem also affects string builder, which is the related issue that's linked from here. Because it's sometimes people will try to pass a char to the string builder constructor, and lo and behold, it gets implicitly turned into an int, and now you've specified the capacity rather than an initial value for the string builder.
Right.
So maybe what we can do is find all the APIs across the BCL that take char as parameters. I don't think there are a whole lot of them. I really don't think it's common to pass that across an API. And then we can see just how bad this problem really is. Aside from these two APIs, I've really not heard of this being an issue.
And maybe we should just special case these in a rule.
Which we could, yeah. But we would want the evidence first that that these are really the only two things that are a problem, which my gut tells me they are.
It's not places that take char, it's places that take int that you're concerned about, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Which basically means write the was there an implicit conversion from char to int going on here? Look at all of them and see, do we have any of these bugs in our own code? But presumably we would have debugged them by now.
We would have found them, yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Steve. My heuristic for looking for stuff would not have worked. Yeah.
Yeah, looking at all APIs that take ints is not very useful, right?
No, I guess what you would want is you would want to look at APIs which take ints and also have overloads that take chars or strings, because then that could be an indication that there's a char being widened here.
I wouldn't catch the string builder one though, right?
It would have, actually, because string builder
has a string
builder
constructor.
takes, yeah.
Does it? I mean,
The initial value.
Oh, you mean like there's a string one, and then there's an int one?
Yes.
Yep.
I see.
And having a string overload and an int overload on the same API is a little suspicious, because like they clearly mean two different things.
Sure, we could do that. So who's on the hook for that?
I mean, I could do it in like November, I guess.
I mean, I personally don't care for the rule, but like it seems like if we say there's an action item, we should make sure somebody's on the hook for that action item.
Right. I mean, so I mean, there's three things that I've heard that we might be saying here. One is make a rule that you're passing a char in a place that we know people get this wrong, which would be string.split in the second position and the string builder constructor. Another is try to generalize that to looking at overloads, so you have this implicit conversion, and in any of the overloads there was a string or a char, and be like, maybe you're not doing the right thing. And then the third is just finding all implicit. You went from character data into number data, and maybe you didn't mean to do that. So what are we thinking we should do?
So special casing the two APIs, I think, gets us immediate benefit. I think there is an argument to be made for doing a wider investigation, but as far as I'm aware, no one has time to commit to it in the foreseeable future.
Which is fine. I mean, the rule is not urgent, right? Like it's
Sure.
flagged for future anyways. But I think it would just be good to just sketch what we want to happen, and then if we come back to it in 6 months, we're not like, what did we want to do here?
So are we okay with having a rule targeting two specific APIs and having that same rule be able to get future APIs? Or would we want different rules for that?
No, I'm totally fine with that.
Okay.
I would just say like that just to me implies that both APIs should have the same diagnostic ID, because otherwise we're now saying every new API gets a new ID. That would be pretty bad.
Yeah,
So-
I would want the same ID.
And then we can, given evidence, we can decide that's cool. We no longer special case it. We just make it hard coded against, into char conversions, or sorry, char to int conversions, or we can say no, we only special case the APIs we know of. Seems both fine.
Steve, would that also alleviate your concerns too, where if we narrow it just to these two APIs, we're very unlikely to find false positives?
Yeah, that's fine by me.
Okay. And if you really intended to do it, like you said, I think, Emo, just do the explicit cast and call it a day. And
Right.
the analyzer shouldn't trigger on explicit casts.
Right.
The really insidious thing about the string split one is like you might not actually detect the error until after your application's already fallen down in production. Because the test data, like by definition, the only time you'll ever run into this is if you're trying to split on multiple things like a comma and a semicolon, and your test data, for whatever reason, might not have semicolons.
Yep. So
Alright.
And then if we get param span in the future, like God knows what the actual preferred overload chosen would be.
Alright, so this is reliability info? Reliability warning?
I would say warning because you almost certainly have an error at the call site.
I say start with warning, and then we'll do our normal thing of running it over, various code bases, and it shouldn't find anything. If it does, we should reconsider. Well, either it finds things and they're all, true, and we need to fix them, or it finds things and we reconsider if they were false positives for some reason.
Yeah. Because we've narrowed the scope of this, I have high confidence that what it finds will be legitimate problems. If we ever widen the scope of this, my confidence falls off quite a bit.
Alright, but this is the specific known bad, or specific known problematic members.
Is reliability the right category?
yeah, I mean, based that you make bugs.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I didn't know if reliability was like instability versus like just, hey, you're doing something wrong.
I guess correctness is the other one, right? Yeah,
Yeah, this would be correctness, I would think.
that's fair. Yeah, I think reliability is more like threading. Right.
Yeah.
Stress bugs. So one more, right?
One
I made
more.
input.
Alright. Recommend use of concrete types to maximize devirtualization potential 5119 or 3. So, reading through this, I think it's saying if we find a field or a local variable and we see that it's using a more relaxed type than it could, to suggest using the stronger type. So making the field be the strongest type it can for the values that get assigned to it. And I think you commented on this, Steve, so do you agree with that as the heuristic here?
Sorry, say it one more time.
That for a local variable, specifically not a parameter, so for a local variable or a non-public field or non-protected field, make sure that the field is assigned to the strongest, or declared as the strongest type it can be.
Yes.
Yes.
Are we
Steve,
doing
you?
any analysis on use sites? Because I mean, Steven said like it can introduce different behavior, right? Are we just saying no? We just always fire this when we see this pattern.
I mean, I would say we start with just firing it and see if if we ever get it wrong. I mean, we could of course choose to not offer a fixer if we were really concerned, or we could do something else. But I think the cases where this will go wrong are few and far between.
Well, I also think it will be hard to rulify that.
Yeah, we have a very difficult time. We'd have if we said we cared about these corner cases, we'd have a very difficult time ever offering the rule.
Yeah.
By the way, this analyzer, if it already existed in .NET 6, would have found bugs before we checked them in. Or it would have found regressions, sorry, before we checked them in. One of the things I'm thinking of right now is where we made a change to system text JSON and regressed the size of the binary by like 10K in WASM scenarios. And that was largely due to the fact that we had a private field as an interface rather than the concrete type that we knew the interface to be. This analyzer would have caught that.
And so then we ended up, the linker didn't remove a bunch of stuff because it didn't remove anything.
Correct. Yeah, the linker had to pessimistically keep a whole buttload of stuff.
I mean, what's funny though is that this is the opposite of what ReSharper recommends, and also the opposite of what people in the Java ecosystem are usually doing. Like they had this guideline for years, where you should use the weakest type possible or something.
For fields and locals, or for public APIs?
No, literally for most of the time I see it for locals, which I always felt was over engineering. It's like just because I may at some point decide to use a different collection here, like who cares? Like that seems over engineering. But I mean, that's kind of my experience of a lot of the Java guidelines that came from people that are architecture astronauts, it seems. But I don't know. So like, I mean, I'm very much in favor of that, but like, I'm pretty sure that there will be people who will absolutely hate this rule.
Yeah, I mean, it does move into cases where, the more specific you're writing your declarations, it does make it a little harder to refactor some things later. But I don't know too many people who, if they had a local that was of list, that are really going to want to change it to iList or IEnumerable later.
I mean, like this is one of those where no matter what we set the default to in the SDK, like this will be a warning as error in .NET Runtime, because it's one of the ones we care a lot about this, and the chances of false positives, especially for new code, are insanely low.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So is there value in this if it goes just to a stronger interface? And is there value in this if it goes to a non-sealed type?
There's value in both, but the real value comes from going to there's absolutely value in going to a class instead of an interface. And there's absolutely value in going to a sealed class instead of an interface. And there is minimal value in going to a more derived, to whatever you want to call it, interface. But not much.
I mean, I would say
So
from a
there's one thing-
simplicity standpoint, it seems like just match the type, right? Like it seems weird to say like you go to a base type, whatever, whether it's an interface or a class. It seems both.
Well, this is, you have an IEnumerable, but we see that you assign a list in one case and I don't know, something else that's an iList in another, an array in another, and it's like you could have made this iList. Like you're going to make your life easier if you promote this off of IEnumerable.
That's fair.
I would be 100% happy if we only ever fired this for places where it recommended a class.
Okay.
So
I
there is
agree with
one
Steve.
thing that's pretty common, I think. Well, maybe common in my case, not for everyone else, that this will break. There's obviously the dictionary thing that Steve brought up in the comment. For locals, one of the few times I don't use var because I'm on ASP.NET is when I want an interface because the class I'm calling, has only an explicit interface implementation for the thing that I'm doing. and then that probably won't compile if it's switched to the concrete type. I mean, you could obviously cast, but that's why I'm declaring it.
Well, I
instead
mean, I
of
think
bar
that
there anyway.
we would need the rule to flag those things. So the rule would also need to look at usage sites, and we'd need to decide whether we wanted to use an explicit cast at each call site or just not warn in that case.
Yeah, I guess if you could evaluate whether it break compilation, then that would solve most of it.
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know which way the linker would go, but presumably, as long as it's not a value type, the interfaced cast is free-ish, and so having it at the call site instead of at the variable site or variable declaration means that the linker should know that it gets to still throw a bunch of stuff away.
Yeah, you could even imagine the compiler doing that on our behalf if we knew certain things ahead of time, like that the class was sealed, blah blah blah. Like we could literally just change the IL that's actually emitted to be more efficient. We could also change the JIT to kind of be a little more optimized here. There are weird edge cases. I think enumeration was one of them that was given, because now you have to have the allocation. You can't do the more efficient thing, but whatever. And I imagine the scenarios that Stephen was talking about, that's you're not enumerating over those interfaces, right? You're just calling methods on them.
Right. So generally, it's just to save the casting a line or two down, right?
Yeah.
It's not even a performance thing. It's just to make the code look slightly nicer.
Yeah, I've done this too. It's fine.
So are we saying
I can imagine a variety of options here. One would just be, we ship a rule as info, and people can upgrade it if they want to, and if there are some false positives, it's up to them. We could have the fixer, if it broke compilation because it would otherwise break compilation because of explicitly implemented interfaces. We could have the fixer automatically fix the call sites, and someone could choose to apply the rule if they wanted to or not, or to that particular instance. It's just one of those where I selfishly, I want this for all of .NET runtime, and I want it to basically be an error.
and we should do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we did make it be a total usage analysis, because it'll have to look at every assignment to figure out what went into it. If we make it pull every member access off of it and see that there was the possibility that the type that it's going to has something as explicit, would we make that a different diagnostic, or are we just going to shrug and move on?
I think I'd probably start by shrugging and moving on. You could also even start I would probably shrug and.
Because again, with a sealed type, we know everything. But if you go from, IEnumerable to IList, no, okay, that's a bad one. If you go to a non-sealed type from an interface, a more derived type could have explicitly implemented the interface, and you're now changing your call flow. Because you're going to get the middle classes method instead of the derived classes method.
Correct, because it's no longer virtual dispatch.
Because you're changing it to the class, either the class's virtual call or the class's non-virtual call instead of the interface's virtual call, which got remapped in the derived type. It's super weird, but
yeah, I can.
So base is
imagine...
implicitly an IFOO, and then derived is explicitly an IFOO, remapping all the things away from base's members. Again, you're being weird, but
So someone subclassed list of t and then gave a new implementation of iListOfT.add as an example.
Yeah, I think list is sealed, but
Yeah.
otherwise, yes.
Sure.
No, it's not sealed, but
Yeah.
it's not, nothing is virtual.
Okay,
Yeah,
so then
because we
exactly
wanted-
that.
Yeah, because we wanted list and dictionary to be as fast as possible, so we didn't make anything virtual. But
So yes, it's you made my list extends list, and you explicitly implemented iList.add.
Yeah, I would argue don't do that.
Right.
I mean, we could say the rule does the following: it looks at all assignments, it finds the common type across them. If the common type is a class, it recommends it. Otherwise, it shuts up. And then it's easy to
So
understand.
for V1, don't even go to the best we can. It's literally every assignment was of the same type. Declare it as that type.
More, I'm just saying, like, look at all the assignments to the field, right? Initializer and whatever else you're doing. Find the common base type across all assignments, and if that base type is not a class, don't report a diagnostic. If there is a class, recommend that type. If the field is not declared as that.
Right. That'll still run into this. You went from an
Yes.
interface to a class and did some wonky things.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. Don't do that, right? Let's just say, like, if we try to detect that, it will be very difficult, right?
would it
As
be
a generic-
possible? Would it be possible to simplify this by trapping only the example that was given here, where you have an inline assignment as part of the field declaration?
You mean only initializer, but you can
Correct.
still reassign, right?
Not
the
if it's read-only.
read-only was the case given.
Yeah. So if
So-
you only look at read-only fields, then yes, you could simplify that. But
I guess you could look at I guess in the constructor you can still reassign a read-only field, but I mean, we could get away with saying like it is, like you actually newed something up. You know the concrete type of that thing. You didn't take it
Yeah.
as like a constructor parameter, and then you assigned it to a field of an interface or a base type. Like trap
feel like-
that.
yeah, I feel like read-only is too limiting because I very often use read-only just for lazy stuff, and that now I don't get the rule. Seems unfortunate.
Okay, well, ignore read-only then, right? Say that the field is assigned from only one place, and it's assigned from a new statement.
But why is that relevant? Because I mean, you could just say, look at all the assignments and find the common base type, right? Like that doesn't solve the problem of if somebody does something wonky in the inheritance, right?
It does, actually. Because if you newed it up, you have the exact type. No one could have subclassed it and done anything silly.
Well, you could still change behavior, right?
I mean, you could, but I think we've already said that's a weird edge case we don't care about.
But yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Is like if let's say I derive from list of t and I re-implement I list of of t, right? And now I assign it to an I list of t rather than my derived type of list of t, right? Then even if it's only assigned once, that changes behavior. And so if we give up on that, then I don't know why we would limit it to just one assignment.
I guess I thought we were saying that we wanted to support that someone could have subclassed list of t, and then we didn't want to start calling like intermediate methods without going through the most derived implementation. Did I misunderstand that?
Well,
Yeah, I guess I'm saying like we should make a decision whether we care about people doing these kind of things because it will be very hard to track. And I think like I would just have a rule that is easy to explain, and I think it seems easy to explain to say, hey, across all your assignments, we noticed the common type is foo, but you declared an even more base type. Maybe you
Sure.
should use foo instead, right?
Yeah, that's the easiest. I think that's the easiest rule to explain, but it's the one with a decent number of holes in it.
And that's the thing
If-
I don't have a
yeah.
good handle on. Like to me, these all seem like almost unintentional corner cases rather than intentional behaviors.
Yeah, maybe, sure. I guess I was saying that a potential equivalent rule could be like we assigned and the assignments were the result of a new, which means we actually know the honest to God concrete type going in there. Like we didn't we didn't just fetch it as a return value from a method somewhere. And in that case, we know that we're not going to run into these holes.
Yeah. I mean,
But it's more explanation though, obviously, and maybe that's not a good thing.
yeah, I mean, as it stands, I think it's easy to explain. Like you try to, have the most derived type possible, and ideally they would be sealed, right? or at least not virtual, right? But that's something that we can't control.
But the common types, like if you have an interface, it's probably because you want to talk about something that's not sealed, like a collection type, kind of by definition. So
right.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, just quick example here of what we would break.
Mm-hmm.
And this will no longer call ilist.add, it will call list.add. And so it would bypass the side effect of calling add here.
Right.
Well, in your case, we would actually suggest my list of foo, right?
Right, but my list.add
yes,
is list.add.
Yes,
Yeah.
You're right.
And because changing it from the interface call to the straight call when the method it was going to call is not actually the interface implementation.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I would argue that's probably poor API design on my list, but yes, you're absolutely correct.
Right. Well, again, that's the degenerate case that we're going to break, and I think we're all okay with saying no one should have written code like that.
I mean, I think it's reasonable to do these gymnastics, but then I think you really want to redefine new as well. Like you really want a public new add to make things sensible, right? Otherwise, it's just really weird.
Yeah, definitely hide the base new if you're going to do these hijinks.
Right. So, yeah, and I don't think there's any problem with going to a more specific interface, because usually the more specific interface is not going to redefine, like they're not going to have used new, so you're not going to change what you're calling there. So the interface one is actually a safer substitution. It's the class where you can now get the class and the interface don't actually agree on what add means.
Right, but if the point of this is for performance, then staying within an interface isn't really going to help you at all anyway.
Right. So, but I think Emo had the suggestion of if the most common type is an interface, then don't bother firing the thing. We've already done the work. Yeah. Assuming that is an easy enough, like the compiler, you can throw 3 types at it and ask what's the most common base type, or even if you can just throw 2 at it, then great, we have an answer.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, we could also special case like list, dictionary, enumerable collection.
We could, but
it seems not quite as useful. But it would be probably the 80% match.
Right, but I mean, when it comes to this linker thing, like more is more, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can say we're gonna have false positives on this in runtime.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
And that's the cases that I can come up with are X509 certificates has, we have like the I export PAL. Well, in each of our individual OSs, there's only one instantiation of that interface, and it's explicitly assigned in a thing. But if you look across the way that it gets declared and the way that it gets utilized, like the reason we have the interface is because having the interface means we get a better answer than I can't find this method.
Yeah. And if a type is marked as serializable, or if a field is marked with data member, we should probably suppress the analyzer, because now you're changing serialization layouts, and that is risky.
But in the case that I pulled out of X509 certificates, that is a read-only static field assignment, and I think that the JIT auto-promotes that one. So the JIT covers this one, the analyzer won't.
Yep.
So, and now, what were you saying about serializable types? Don't run if the parent type is serializable?
If the type itself is marked with serializable, or the field is marked with data member, or the type is marked with data contract, I believe we should suppress this rule. Because at that point, like, we're changing how the serializers behave, and there might have been a very good reason that they wrote the type the way they did, and we might actually break their code.
But it can still work on local variables in methods of types marked serializable.
Yeah, I'm talking only about fields.
Yeah, the problem with serialization though is that are we only talking about binary formatter, or are we? Because I mean, we don't know which types are serializable, right? Or being serialized, I should say, because you can serialize any type you want. I feel like once you say that, like, what does it mean? Any attribute of the JSON one, any attributes of the data contract ones.
That's fair.
I would just say if the thing is public, don't do it. And if you serialize private state, is like, well, you're already halfway pregnant, so we don't care. All properties, right? I think private properties are still fair game.
Yes. Because really, it's if it's an auto prop.
Yeah, auto props are now powerful enough that I think many people will probably use them over fields. And so I could totally see them being private as well. It's probably rare, but it seems like if the thing is private, whether it's a field or property, you can do it. If it's public or protected field or property, you just leave it alone.
All right. So I think we've covered it. We know there are some holes. Oh, so what are we thinking? I know Steve will promote it to error in runtime, but for the general world, is this info performance?
I would probably start with info and see what feedback we're getting. As I said, there will be some people who will absolutely hate it. But given that it's a perf optimization, I don't see a reason why we would turn it on by default.
Well, we would want to do it within our own libraries, obviously, like Steve said.
Yeah, but that's just we
Yeah.
promote our
Yeah.
custom rule to say that this diagnostic has a higher severity.
Yeah. I mean, it is debatable. I think moving forward, like, I think there's this question now, you know, if somebody writes a library, do we want this library to be great for linking by default? If the answer is yes, then all the rules that are off by default that would take away from that might be problematic, right? So we might boost it later. But I think starting it with info is probably the right call.
Yeah. Oh, and internal also, not just public and protected.
Fair, although, yeah.
Because it could be set in a manner that you're not aware of because of friend assemblies.
Yeah, I think we should exclude internal as well. I think if it's not private, I would not touch it.
Yeah.
Local or private, I think, are the only visibilities that I think are okay.
Sorry, I might have missed something. Why not internal?
Because of friend assemblies, you can't track all assignments to the field.
Yeah. I mean, in general, like, it's similar to protected, right? Like, now you're saying there's...
I mean, we can, like, internal's totally fine, and we can say we don't run on internal if you have declared the internal's visible to attribute.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty
And,
common to enable that for tests, though. So
Yeah, and if your build system doesn't automatically, put it in as a separate file.
Well, but during the compilation phase whether or not you have the IVT. Like it's part of the compilation or not. The analyzer runs basically as part of a compilation unit, or runs as part of a compilation. So effectively, so you would know if it's there. Now, yes, you could be in the state where your in make file adds an internal visible to, and your CS proj doesn't have it. But I'm sorry, Windows and Office. Get on a unified build system.
All right.
or at least make them match. So.
Seems like a good starting point.
So yeah, we may find out we're totally wrong here, but I think it's a reasonable starting place.
Sure, let's do it.
Then don't forget to mark it. And then I think we're done for the day.
Yep. So, I guess now I get to eat a very rushed lunch, but I observe that we are beyond time, and we actually got through everything we wanted to get through, I think. So, yeah, I don't see Analyzer on here at all. And our list is getting nice and small, so, I don't know, propose new API. And with that, I declare the meeting adjourned. Have a nice day. Auf Wiederhören.